There was always a silence in that house. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. A silence that warned you to tread carefully, because even the smallest mistake could explode into chaos. Everything had rules. Everything had limits. A glass left crooked on the table. A book out of place on the shelf. A single wrong word spoken at the wrong time. Any of these things could turn the air thick with danger. From childhood, life was like walking barefoot on broken glass. Every step, every breath, every glance had to be measured, careful, cautious. Laugh too much and it was disrespect. Talk too much and it was rebellion. Stay too quiet and it was defiance. She, the mother, had eyes that could strip flesh from bone without touching you. One look was all it took to know how the evening would unfold. If her eyes narrowed just a fraction, if her lips twitched in irritation, then the night ahead was certain. Yelling, punishment, maybe worse. The father was always there, but never present. He sat in the courtyard with a newspaper, flipping the same page again and again, as though words printed on paper were more important than the people around him. He saw everything but spoke nothing. His silence was his survival, not ours. I wanted to scream at him. Why don't you say something? Why don't you stop her? But he never did. His silence protected him, not me. It only took something as small as a plate. One evening, it slipped from trembling hands and shattered on the floor. A simple accident, but to her it wasn't an accident. It was proof. Proof of worthlessness. Proof of failure. Her voice cut through the air like knives. You'll never be good enough. You're nothing but a burden. The words lodged themselves deep, carving wounds invisible to everyone else. My hands shook. My throat closed up. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run. Every corner of the house was hers. Every door locked, every window watched. Nights were the hardest. The silence became unbearable in the dark. Lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think, but the thoughts always came. When will this end? When will someone see me? When will anyone hear me scream? Years passed like this, and with each year her control grew tighter. The rules multiplied. No friends were allowed. No phone unless she watched every word. No staying late at school. No secrets. No freedom. Freedom only existed in daydreams. And then came the night everything changed. The shouting had been worse than ever, cutting deeper, leaving no space to breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. The world spun like it was caving in, then darkness. When my eyes opened again, it wasn't the cracked ceiling of the house I saw. It was the cold, sterile brightness of hospital lights. Machines beeped steadily at my side. Tubes ran into my arm. The doc through the fog. You're safe now. If you had been brought in any later, you might not have survived. Safe, the word didn't fit. Because for as long as I could remember, safety had been nothing more than a fantasy. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and artificial lemon, the kind of sterile cleanliness that never really felt clean. A monitor beeped steadily at my bedside, marking every fragile heartbeat like a metronome reminding me that I was still alive. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt full, or warm, or safe, but now I was here, my body betrayed, my secret revealed. When the nurse leaned over me with a clipboard, her face softened the way adults do when they look at something broken. She spoke quietly, as if even her voice might shatter me further. You've been severely malnourished for years, she said. We have to be very careful how we feed you now. Too much food too quickly could overwhelm your system. It's called refeeding syndrome. Her words floated in the air, heavy and terrifying. Food, something so simple, so natural, had become dangerous. My own body wasn't sure how to accept it anymore. When my father finally walked into the hospital room, his eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look like the distant figure who hid behind his newspaper every night. He looked like a man who had just been told the ground beneath his feet wasn't real. He took one look at me, my hollow cheeks, my brittle hair, the bones visible beneath pale skin, and he crumbled. My daughter, he whispered, collapsing into the chair by my bed. My daughter weighs 73 pounds. I ate dinner with her every night and didn't see it. His hands shook as he buried his face in them, tears spilling through his fingers. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but my arms felt like twigs, fragile and useless. I didn't have the strength to carry his grief along with mine, so I stared at the ceiling and let his words sink into the quiet between us. Across the room, she, my mother, sat with her legs crossed, composed as ever. Her voice slid through the air, smooth, controlled, poisonous. He made me do it, she said to anyone who would listen. He wanted thin daughters. I was protecting her. The lie was practiced, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed she could twist any narrative to her advantage. And for a moment, I saw it working. The social worker who entered with her clipboard looked between my parents with uncertainty, pen hovering above the paper. My stomach dropped. Was it possible that after everything, after years of weigh-ins, skipped meals and punishments, she would still find a way to make it my father's fault? The days that followed blurred together in a haze of IV drips and hushed conversations. Nurses came and went, adjusting fluids, monitoring heart rhythms, watching me like I was an experiment that might fail at any moment. I overheard words like osteoporosis, organ damage, and chronic malnutrition, words that belonged to old women, not teenagers. Every morning, a woman named Clarissa from Child Protective Services visited. She had kind eyes but carried a clipboard like a shield. She asked gentle questions. What happened at home? How were meals divided? Did anyone ever force you not to eat? I tried to answer, but each time I opened my mouth, my mother's voice would cut through mine. She'd cry, she'd sob. She'd weave stories so fluidly that even Clarissa looked uncertain. I was only trying to help. She was gaining too much weight. I didn't want her to be bullied. I didn't want her to get sick. You know how diabetes runs in families? Her lies filled every space, choking out the truth. But there were cracks she couldn't control. One afternoon, while a nurse changed my IV line, I told her everything. The morning weigh-ins, the celery lunches, the threats that if I ate, my sister would be punished instead. My voice shook, but the words spilled out faster than I could stop them. The nurse wrote every word down, her jaw tight, her hands steady. This isn't just disordered eating, she said quietly. This is abuse. And for the first time, someone believed me. The investigation crept forward like molasses. My father was removed from the house temporarily, pending further inquiry, while my mother stayed free to spin her narrative. I hid myself for not speaking up sooner, for not saving him from her lies. At school, the truth began to slip out in whispers. A counselor visited me in the hospital, carrying a stack of get well cards from classmates. Her voice was firm, her eyes determined. The AV system recorded recorded part of the award ceremony, she told me. He might have captured what you said into the microphone that night. My heart thudded. If that recording existed, it would be proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. Proof that she had been exposed in front of hundreds of people. But when the tape was recovered, the audio was fuzzy, the words barely audible. Another blow. Another almost. Still, pieces began to add up. The school nurse produced records. 17 incidents over 2 years where I had fainted, reported dizziness, or showed alarming weight loss. 17 opportunities for someone to have noticed. All ignored. But now, each incident became evidence. Each fainting spell a breadcrumb leading to the truth. Clarissa visited us unannounced. She found the scale hidden in my mother's closet, tucked behind designer dresses. On the wall beside it, scratched tally marks lined the paint. Hundreds of them. One for each weigh-in. A prison wall I had stood against every day. Recovery center where I was transferred. Healing was a battlefield of its own. Physical therapy left me trembling after walking 10 steps. My muscles had consumed themselves for survival, leaving behind little more than bone and exhaustion. A therapist named Shanti became my anchor. She didn't sugarcoat, didn't let me drown in feelings. Facts, not feelings, she would say. Tell your story like evidence, not like a wound. And slowly, I learned how to narrate the horror without breaking under it. My father was finally allowed a supervised visit. The moment he entered the room, he collapsed into tears. I ate dinner with you every night, he said, his voice wrecked. I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I held his shaking hands. Then see me now, I whispered. Don't apologize. Fight. And he nodded, determination sparking through his grief. Evidence began to pile up. Pharmacy records showed bulk purchases of laxatives, matching perfectly with the dates of my worst health episodes. Teachers wrote statements describing my weight loss, my exhaustion, my constant fainting. Dr. Roberts, the hospital physician, compiled medical reports that painted the truth in hard, undeniable numbers. Brittle bones, damaged organs, hormone levels screaming starvation. This isn't anorexia, he testified in a preliminary hearing. This is systematic forced malnutrition. Still, it wasn't enough. Clarissa insisted the court needed more. That's when my sister stepped forward. She was only a child, but she had lived under the same roof, trapped in the same web. During a play date at a friend's house, she recorded our mother coaching her on what to say in court. Tell them Dad never let us eat dessert. Tell them he called us fat. When my sister handed the recording to Clarissa, the room shifted. For the first time, the weight of evidence tipped against my mother. The courtroom was cold, unforgiving. I took the stand, my voice steady, my notebook in hand. 30 pages of notes I had written in the hospital. Every weigh-in, every skipped meal, every punishment. I read them like scripture. When the audio from the award ceremony played, clear as glass on the secondary hearing impaired system, my words echoed through the room. You said I'm too fat, remember? Every morning when you weigh me, my mother's voice screamed in the background. My sister's small confession followed. The judge's face hardened. Dr. Roberts presented medical charts, x-rays, and lab reports that showed my body had been systematically broken. Clarissa presented the photos of tally marks on the closet wall. My sister's secret recording of our mother coaching her to lie was played aloud, silencing even my mother's attorney. When my mother finally took the stand, she tried to wear the mask of reason. Children need structure, she said smoothly. Monitoring weight is responsible parenting. The judge cut her off. I've heard enough. The ruling wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. Full custody was granted to my father. My mother was restricted to supervised visits only, with mandatory psychological evaluation before any future review. She didn't go to prison, not yet, but she lost the thing she valued most. Control. Back at my father's small apartment above a pizza shop, life began again in fragments. The floor smelled of garlic and grease. The stairs creaked, but it was ours. Meals were clumsy. Burnt grilled cheese, undercooked pasta, but they were shared. For the first time in years, food wasn't punishment. One afternoon at the recovery program, I finished an entire plate without counting calories, without fear. My nutritionist cried and I laughed. The sound unfamiliar but real. At home, we started new traditions. Bad jokes at the dinner table, milk coming out of my sister's nose from laughing too hard. My father attending parenting classes 3 nights a week, determined to rebuild not just trust, but himself. I built something too, a binder, thick and heavy, filled with every piece of evidence, medical reports, therapy notes, legal documents, photos of bruises, timelines, receipts. Not for the court, not for revenge, for me, for my sister, for anyone who might need proof that monsters can hide behind manicured nails and suburban smiles. It was my wall, stronger than any prison she had built for us. And finally, for the first time, I felt free. The custody ruling should have felt like the end. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself it was. But endings don't come neatly tied with court documents or a judge's gavel. Trauma doesn't evaporate just because someone writes down that you're safe now. The truth was messier, heavier. 3 months after the family court decision, a prosecutor contacted us. We're opening a criminal case, she said, her voice clipped but firm. This goes beyond custody battles. What happened is neglect, coercion, medical endangerment. It meets the threshold for child abuse charges. The words swirled around me. Child abuse charges. For so long, I had thought of what I endured as something private. A twisted set of rules only I had to live by. To hear it named in cold legal terms was jarring, but strangely liberating. It meant the system was no longer just whispering about what might have happened. It was acknowledging what did. My father stiffened beside me when the prosecutor explained the process, subpoenas, hearings, witnesses, a jury. He had lived through divorce, through humiliation, through custody fights. But this was criminal court. The stakes were different. She'll twist it, he muttered. She always twists it. But the prosecutor shook her head. Not this time. We have enough. And for the first time, I dared to believe her. The trial preparation stretched across months, long enough for my bones to slowly regain density, for my hair to grow thicker, for the hollows of my face to soften. But healing was never linear. Some nights I woke drenched in sweat, certain I could hear her footsteps outside my door. I ate too quickly at times, desperate to prove to myself that no one could stop me, only to collapse with cramps so sharp they sent me to the ER. My body was relearning how to exist. My mind was relearning how to trust. School was its own battlefield. Whispers followed me down hallways, fragments of overheard conversations. That's the girl who fainted at the ceremony. Her mom starved her, right? Some kids looked at me with pity, others with fascination, like I was a living cautionary tale. Teachers treated me like I might snap under the weight of a pencil. Counselors hovered. Classmates invited me to sit with them at lunch, but watched too closely to see how many bites I took. I wanted to scream at all of them, "I am not your tragedy to analyze." But instead, I stayed quiet. Quiet was familiar. The criminal trial began in the dead of winter, when the air was brittle and the streets shimmered with salt. Walking into the courthouse felt like stepping back into the cage I had barely escaped. My stomach churned, my palms sweated, but I carried my binder with me, the one I had built at the recovery center. Page after page of evidence, my armor. The prosecutor guided me through what to expect. She'll try to discredit you. She'll say you're exaggerating. She'll say you're unstable. But remember, you have truth on your side, and you have documentation. And she was right. My mother's attorney wasted no time. "Isn't it true," he asked during cross-examination, "that you've struggled with body image? Isn't it possible you misunderstood your mother's guidance as something more sinister than it was?" I met his gaze steady. No, I didn't misunderstand being starved. I didn't misunderstand being weighed every morning. I didn't misunderstand when she told me that if I ate, my sister would suffer instead. He shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his papers, but I didn't stop. My voice, once so small, filled the courtroom. When my sister testified, her voice trembled, but she didn't falter. She described watching me faint, watching our mother scream, watching me shrink into someone unrecognizable. And then the recording was played, the one of our mother coaching her to lie. The jury's faces hardened. There was no spin that could erase a mother weaponizing her child. The medical evidence sealed it. Dr. Roberts' charts, the pharmacy receipts, the tally marks photographed from her closet wall. It wasn't just testimony anymore. It was proof carved into numbers, into paint, into receipts. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. "Guilty," the foreman announced, his voice echoing through the room, "on charges of child endangerment, medical neglect, and coercive control." My mother's mask finally cracked. She didn't scream, didn't beg. She just sat there, her lips pressed into a tight line. Her eyes locked on me with a hatred so sharp I felt it in my bones. For the first time, I realized her silence was worse than her words. The sentence was 5 years, not nearly enough for what she had taken from me, from us, but enough to give us space to breathe, enough to make the walls feel less fragile. After the trial, life stumbled forward. My father's small apartment became a home. We repainted the walls a pale yellow that reminded me of sunlight. My sister hung up drawings she made in therapy, bright swirls of color that looked nothing like the gray walls of our old house. We bought a secondhand couch that sagged in the middle, and every night we sat on it together, eating meals that were messy and imperfect, but ours. I joined a support group for survivors of parental abuse. At first, I barely spoke. I listened to others, stories of bruises, of manipulation, of silence forced into children's mouths. I realized then, starvation was just another method of control, another weapon in an arsenal of cruelty. Different details, same wound. Slowly, I began to share my own story. Not just the facts, not just the evidence, but the feelings, the shame, the anger, the hollow ache of wanting a mother and realizing she was the one who had broken me. Each time I spoke, the weight lifted a little more. But recovery isn't clean. It's jagged, unpredictable. There were days I hated myself for eating, for feeling full, for enjoying food when so much of my identity had been built around hunger. There were nights I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the outline of my ribs, panicked that I couldn't see them as clearly anymore. And then there were the moments of light, like the first time I ran without fainting, the first time I laughed so hard my stomach hurt in a way that wasn't sickness, the first time I looked in the mirror and saw not a skeleton, not a victim, but someone alive. Those moments kept me going. Years passed, 5 to be exact. 5 years of therapy, of rebuilding, of piecing together a life that had once been stripped down to numbers on a scale. I graduated high school, then started college. My father remarried, a kind woman who loved cooking and never once commented on portion sizes. My sister grew into a fierce teenager, protective and sharp, her voice louder than I ever remembered mine being at her age. We didn't talk about her often. My mother. The years of her absence were a silence we didn't want to disturb. But on the day she was released, a letter arrived. It was written in her familiar looping script. "I did what I did to save you. One day you'll thank me. I want to see you both. I deserve to see you both." My chest tightened as I read it. Anger flared, but so did something else. Not longing, not forgiveness. Just the old ache of wanting a mother and knowing she would never be one. My father crumpled the letter without reading past the first line. "She doesn't get near you again, ever." And he was right. But that night, lying in bed, I thought about her words, about how abusers rewrite their narratives until they believe them, about how dangerous that belief could be if I ever let her voice drown out mine again. So I pulled out my binder. By then it was thicker, filled with updates, reflections, therapy notes, copies of court transcripts. My wall of truth. I flipped through it slowly, reminding myself of the evidence, the testimony, the facts, not feelings, facts. And for the first time, the ache quieted, because she could write 1,000 letters, she could spin 1,000 lies, but the truth was mine. It was written, documented, undeniable, and I would never let her take it from me again. Time moves differently once you survive something like that. The years afterward blur, not because nothing happens, but because every milestone feels fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. College should have been the beginning of freedom, and in some ways it was. I could decorate my dorm without anyone rearranging it. I could eat at midnight if I wanted. I could laugh too loud, cry too hard, sleep too late. The ordinary became extraordinary, but freedom is complicated when you've been conditioned to fear it. The first night alone in my dorm, silence pressed in around me. Not the heavy silence of my childhood, but still silence. My chest tightened. My heart raced. I pulled the blanket over my head, fighting back tears. The absence of her voice didn't feel safe. It felt like waiting for an explosion that never came. I learned quickly that trauma doesn't disappear just because the abuser does. Relationships were the hardest. Friends came easily enough. I met people in classes, joined clubs, shared late-night pizza runs. But the moment anyone got too close, my defenses spiked. If someone raised their voice, even in laughter, I flinched. If someone tried to surprise me, I pulled back. Dating felt impossible. How can you trust someone when the person meant to protect you was the one who hurt you? I asked my therapist once. "You start small," she said gently. "You practice trust in moments, and you allow yourself to believe that not everyone wants to control you." So I tried. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes I snapped at people who didn't deserve it. Sometimes I ghosted friends because vulnerability felt suffocating. But slowly, carefully, I built connections. distractions. A professor who encouraged my writing. A roommate who left sticky notes on my desk before exams. A boy who didn't push when I hesitated to hold his hand. Who simply waited until I was ready. They became proof that not everyone was her, but the past had ways of creeping back in. One afternoon during sophomore year, I was walking across campus when I heard someone call my name. I turned and froze. It was her, my mother. She stood on the sidewalk, her hair shorter, her face sharper, but unmistakably her. She had found me. My legs trembled. My throat closed. The world narrowed to just her voice. "You've grown," she said softly. "You look healthy." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. "I did what I did for you," she continued. "I kept you safe. You'll see that one day." Her words slid under my skin like they always had. For a moment, I felt 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen with a broken plate at my feet. But then I remembered the binder, the charts, the testimony, the truth. And for the first time, I found my voice. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You didn't save me. You almost killed me." Her face twisted, rage flickering for just a second before she masked it with pity. "You're confused. You've been poisoned against me." I shook my head. "No, I know what you did, and I'll never let you do it again." Then I walked away. My legs nearly collapsed beneath me, but I didn't stop. That was the last time I saw her. After that, something shifted. I realized that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to carry it without letting it crush you. I would always have scars. I would always remember the hunger, the silence, the fear. But those memories no longer defined me. They shaped me. By graduation, I knew what I wanted to do. Not just survive, but use my survival. I started speaking at small events, then larger ones. Support groups, schools, conferences. I told my story not to relive it, but to show others that they weren't alone. The first time I stood on stage, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the microphone. But as I looked out into the crowd, I saw faces. Faces with tears, with nods, with recognition. And suddenly, I wasn't that child trapped in silence anymore. I was someone breaking it. Now, years later, I look at my life and see something I never thought possible. Peace. Not perfect peace. Trauma doesn't vanish, and ghosts still linger, but real, tangible peace. I have a career that matters. I have friends who love me not because I follow rules, but because I am me. I have a body that is strong, nourished, alive. I have a sister who texts me silly memes at midnight, reminding me of how far we've come. Sometimes I think about her, the woman who called herself my mother. I wonder if she still believes her own lies, if she still tells herself she was protecting me. I wonder if she ever feels guilt, or if the narrative she built has become her only truth. But then I remind myself, it doesn't matter, because the real truth is mine. It lives in my binder, in my words, in the people who hear my story and find strength in it. And in that truth, I'm finally free. There are scars that never fade, nights when I still wake up with the echo of her voice in my ears, days when food still feels complicated, moments when trust feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. But there is also laughter, there is love, there is healing. And if you asked me now, all these years later, what I've learned from it all, I would tell you this: monsters don't always live under the bed. Sometimes they live in your own house, wear familiar faces, and call themselves family. But survival is possible. Healing is possible. And no matter how tightly someone tries to control your voice, there will come a day when you speak, and the world will listen.